Dear Stephen, you would. Thank you for your wonderful words. It is an utmost pleasure and a privilege being able to speak at this wonderful opportunity. Dear esteemed auditorium, with his capacity for brilliant associations, Stephen Greenblatt gave me the cue for my lecture. In my book about early symbols of evolution several years ago, I tried to show that, for Darwin, the emblem of nature's self-evolvement as a whole was not the tree, but the coral. This was consequential in that corals turn the boundary drawn between natural processes and human works porous. Soft as an organic being when underwater and at the same time growing like bushes, corals turn hard as stone when exposed to the air, where they offer themselves to humans as nature's gift of jewelry. This myth recorded by Ovidius and Plinius accorded this species an outstanding significance. Corals were not only a species of sign of peace between nature and humans, as Pietro de Cortona showed in his paintings, but also at the same time a substantial symbol of a vector that seems to extend into human skill. In the coral boxes of the periods around 1600, the forms of nature segue seamlessly into the work of man, so that, especially here in the foreground, it would remain unclear where the playful power of nature, lusus naturae, ended and where the work of man began. Stephen Greenblatt answered with a reference to Ariel's song and Shakespeare's The Tempest. Full fathom 5, thy father lies, of his bones are coral made. Those were pearls that were his eyes. Nothing of him doth fade, but does suffer a sea change into something rich and strange. Constant change into something rich and strange will be the motto for my lecture. The trust and the capacity for constant transformation that left behind all dichotomous constructions of opposite poles, like nature versus art, inorganic versus organic, and artifact versus life, was rooted in the decades around 1600, which celebrated the capacities of the hand as no other epoch had. This is why the decades around 1600 have received the name mannerism, derived from hand, manus. This capacity stops at no boundary and thus also not at the separation among the artistic media. The self-portrait by the Dutch artist Hendrik Goltzius in the form of his own hand from around 1580 is not only striking due to the scrupulously rendered depiction of the gristly structure and accentuation of the veins between the skin, but also due to the precision of the lines on the surfaces that betray the technique of gravure painting, printing. The precision of these swellings, parallel lines that continuously converge and diverge again seems to imply a mechanical gravure of the copper plate. But this is an illusion. Unfathomably, the hand is not printed but drawn, thus becoming a symbol of mannerism that is willing to overthrow even the strictest oppositions. The incunable of this principle, in my view, was created by the Dutch miniaturist Joris Hoefnagel. The fireflies, seated on the leaf, throw shadows as if they weren't drawn objects of demonstration, but real creatures that could lift into the air at any moment. The fact that this is more than a metaphor becomes clear upon examining more closely the bottommost firefly, whose wings reveal porous and missing parts. While the body of the insect has been drawn, its wings have been glued to the surface by the artist. If they hadn't been damaged over the centuries in some parts, the mutual assimilation would be perfect. Here is the picture itself that is nature and simulacrum at the same time. Nature has assimilated art, and art has assimilated nature. Perhaps no one besides Shakespeare, as we just heard, has brought the surmounting of the seemingly sharp line into a more fitting formula than the poet Torquato Tasso. According to his dictum, it is nature itself that, in a game shifting the scales, imitated an art that in turn presents itself as an imitator of nature. I quote, "Art appears like nature, who for pleasure jokingly imitates her own imitator," end quote. This is the fundamental principle of what we call mannerism. The jump from nature into art and from art into nature already puts into question the boundary drawn between the two dimensions. It becomes completely problematic when, in depicting itself, nature is both natural object and symbol at the same time. Thus, we come to the second point, Serpent Time as an intrinsic symbol. Since Dürer's drawing in the margin of Maximilian I's prayer book, at the latest, spirals have been regarded as the abstraction of every possible, especially here, of every possible form of motion, not only in nature, but also in the power of invention. In his Fortress book, Dürer traced these forms to the line, the circle, and the S form, in which the potency of all designs develop. In the picture's capacity for abstraction lies the possibility of grasping extreme complex situation at one stroke. Jacopo Ligozzi's depiction from around 1600 of a pair of entwined snakes is an example of how the picture and the symbol of what is depicted can connect with each other. In the middle of the page devoted to their species, the snakes seem to rise out of the surface of the paper. They cast shadows by raising themselves and seeming to threateningly dart their tongues around. The seemingly living bodies twist in a visually balanced X form, which opens towards the left against the direction in which one reads, thereby creating the semantics of danger already by means of this contrariness. Nature nestles into its own symbolic form. The naturalist Sibylle Merian created extremely striking pictures for this principle. Some of the insects she drew during her expedition in Suriname around 1700 show how pictures are able to abstract and generalize the phenomena on a second level, and part of this is the depiction of the manioc plant. The Sphinx moth depicted at the upper left is one of these figures that mix precision and abstraction, in that its proboscis ends in a form resembling a treble clef, which is not found this extremely in nature itself. The researching artist radicalizes the moth as a sign for all of nature by taking up the movements and exaggeration and exaggerating them into a sign that is presented in the snake's tail. Recognizably for those in the know, in the interplay between the snake's tail and the moth's proboscis, nature moves into the pictorial metaphor of its inner structure of motion. In the picture of nature, nature's law of motion and transmutation becomes an abstract pictorial form that is organically inscribed in what is depicted as a symbol of itself. Nature is a hybrid between itself and the picture of its symbolic form. Vitally important for this continuing history was the English artist and art theoretician William Hogarth, who transferred the S-line of all of nature into a spiral by winding it around a three-dimensional cone, thereby grasping anew the potential for motion of nature as well of human imaginative and calculating power. As Winfried Menninghaus revealed, Charles Darwin's concept of beauty as variety, on which his principle of sexual selection is based, explicitly refers to Hogarth's line of beauty. Hogarth's snaking S-line clarifies the principle that Darwin developed as a second model of evolution, beauty as a function of the search for change, symbolized in the climbing plant that entwines the tree as an organic symbol of all of nature. Darwin adopted this definition of natural beauty as the unwavering search for variability, that is, for the deviation symbolized in interweaving and in the curving line. This process of a harmony between nature and symbol has grown in strength. An especially striking example is the primary symbol of the last 50 years, the double helix. The mobilization of the S-line into a spatially three-dimensionalized and reproduced spiral, as Paul Klee's pedagogical textbook developed it, urges itself upon us out of nature as its Gestalt into the world of symbols. The tremendousness of the diagram of the double helix created by the artist Odile Crick. Epistemologically, it makes the viewer's hair stand on end. In the last 25 years, the diagrammatic focusing of this double helix has been relativized again and again, including and especially by genetic research itself. But the problem remains that Dürer's invention of an abstracted picture of the latency of all natural processes in a related form that nature provides or is read out of nature. One could argue that this process works in drawings alone, whereas the indexical character of photography overcomes this latent contingency of drawings like that of the double helix fabricated by the artist Odile Crick, wife of Francis Crick. We thus come to the third point, symbolization in drawing and photography. An example may make this clear. The results of the Baudin exhibition that French naturalists undertook from 1800 to 1804 are especially impressive in the depictions of jellyfish. The watercolor of Kuanea Lamarcky grandly shows is extending a bell so that the tentacles have less tension and cease swinging horizontally. In the Crusoaria hysocella, the tentacles are raised around the bell so that the view is open to its manubrium, or stomach stalk, whose parts are minutely characterized but also dramatized by means of differentiation in color. The coloration intensifies and clarifies using a systematic aspects along which exact depiction. The watercolor adheres to the double game of accurate closeness to nature and analytic emphasis. Let us compare it with the key creature of recent biology, once again a jellyfish. Aquaria victoria, a species native to the northern Pacific. Under its dark calotte, the inner arches of its bell radiate as serially phosphorescently as its manubrium and its tentacles with cnidoctites. The jellyfish seems as if illuminated from below by a bright spotlight aimed precisely at the part of its body to let it light up against the darkness of the sea. The tightrope walk between closeness to nature and analytic clarification that the drawing carries out has flowed artistically into the processing of the photograph. The photo has taken on characteristics of the drawing in order to fulfill its analytical function. Nature remains understandable also and especially through the analytic and thereby thoroughly symbolizing modes of depiction. This is the astonishing consequence that brings us to the fourth point, the symbiosis of picture and nature as the principle of neomannerism. The Aquaria Victoria is famous for the fact that its proteins use calcium ions to produce blue light when its skin is touched. This blue light now acts as a stimulatory source for the jellyfish green fluorescent protein, which releases absorbed energy in the form of green fluorescent light. At the beginning of the 1990s, scientists found out that this protein also exerts the bioluminescence effect in other organisms when placed under UV radiation. In recent years, this effect has led to the phenomenon that scientists have begun to paint within nature, so to speak. In order to match the image expectations of scientific analysis, the technique of stimulated emission depletion produces new organ parts. A fluorescent molecule is introduced into the living specimen that is to be examined. The molecule's light signals take the position of the object to be investigated. The indicator becomes part of what is to be indicated. Nature itself is manipulated to become light. A variant of this procedure is optogenetics, in which, by means of a retrovirus, sequences of algae and jellyfish genes that codify fluorescent proteins are inserted into nerve cells. When stimulated with blue light, these cells react, making it possible to map neural networks in a way previously impossible. To obtain images of a natural form, a hybrid is first produced, a chimera, that has the ability to produce pictures. Chimeras emerge whose right to exist lies in their pictorially active potential. With this, however, a new symbolic concept of nature appears that comprises nature as well as the observer's visual expectations. The craving for images produces monsters, in the sense of monstrare, to show. They are creatures of the visualization of nature. These creatures are the work of humans, but they are also part of the biosphere, not its metaphor. And with this, they are hybrids that are immune even to the conceptual scalpel. By means of a light-induced activation of brain cells in mice produces a color image of their memory faculty. By this is not what is most outrageous. Much more astonishing is the possibility of turning paths of image creation into channels of control and order. Image analysis becomes a medium of command at the speed of light. This bridges the gap to synthetic biology, whose construction of newly designed organisms have been close to the visual arts from the beginning. Produced last year, an albino, on the left, a goldfish that is able to glow but not to reproduce itself, is a work of art in the long series of bioworks that stretches back to the 1930s. This also goes for the self-luminous tobacco plant created by the cell biologist Stephen Howell, which the artist Rainer Maria Matusek redefined as an artwork. It is clear to both sides that synthetic biology can be defined equally as bioart or as gene technology. This is even truer for xenobiology, which, as its name, biology of the alien and strange, xeno, already suggests, has begun to produce a new nature as an artistic creator. the most disgusting emblem of a hierarchically oriented diagram of evolution, Ernst Haeckel's tree of evolution, was used to formulate the program of a xenobiological beginning of a new epoch of creation, that of man. The artist Alexandra Daisy Ginsberg took this interplay to an extreme by working with researchers on creatures intended to help keep biological systems from breaking down and to create new forms of ergonometric organic machines like the bioremediation unit, which is called like this here. I come to the conclusion. A basic characteristic that drives art and research forward concurrently lies in the mania to approach nature artificially until, through its presence, it determines art itself. This is the principle of overcoming separations, and this tendency seems to be owed to a basic manneristic trait, as was salient in Höfnagel. All these phenomena and problems have a critical and arousing aspect, and so it is all the more important that they be captured in a theory. It remains to be seen whether the closed circuit of the connection between picture and organism is a magical or a vicious circle. But in any case, this is a zone that permits us to speak of our times as a neomannerism. If the observation is accurate that our epoch, independent of disciplines and fields of knowledge, can be understood as an age of neomannerism, then both sides, the positive and the negative, ought to be encompassed more powerfully in a theory of our time. A term like neomannerism is not yet a theory, but perhaps the phenomena described here can be grasped more clearly when they are connected with it. A constant, I quote again, change into something rich and strange. This line from The Tempest is Shakespeare's motto for our times. Thank you.